Mick Lynch has announced he will be retiring as General Secretary of the RMT at the age of 63. Lynch joined the union in 1993 after he started working for Eurostar and was elected as General Secretary in 2021 after serving as Assistant General Secretary and on the National Executive Committee. In a statement from the RMT, Mick Lynch said this on his decision to step down. "It has been a privilege to serve this union for over 30 years in all its capacities, but now it is time for change. The union has been through a lot of struggles in recent years, and I believe that it has only made it stronger despite all the odds. There has never been a more urgent need for a strong union for all transport and energy workers of all grades. But we can only maintain and build a robust organisation for these workers if there is renewal and change. We can all be proud that our union stood up against the wholesale attacks on the rail industry by the previous Tory government, and the union defeated them. RMT will always need a new generation of workers to take up the fight for its members and for a fairer society for all, and I'm immensely proud to have been part of that struggle." During his tenure as General Secretary, Lynch became one of the most prominent voices challenging the Boris Johnson government for not just the issue of rail strikes, but on behalf of all working class people. He rallied against increasing energy bills, he argued for all workers to have inflation-proof wage increases, and advocated for a ban on arms sales to Israel. Alongside leading a strike wave which secured a wage increase of 14% for the lowest paid rail workers, his no-nonsense, fiery media appearances felt to many like a breath of fresh air. To discuss Lynch's tenure and what the future might hold for the RMT, I spoke earlier to Novara Media's very own Labour movement correspondent, Polly Smythe. I began by asking her to give us an overview of Lynch's time in the RMT.
So Mick Lynch was elected as RMT General Secretary in 2021. And the fact that I love about Lynch is that he very nearly didn't end up in the railways. In fact, his route into the railways came about because he was blacklisted illegally for union activity when he was working in construction. And because he couldn't get a job back in 1993, found work on the Eurostar, and the rest is history. So when he was elected as General Secretary of the RMT back in 2021, he was replacing Mick who left. And he's had a very busy few years. The top line, the thing that we might think of first is overseeing the first national UK railway strike since 1989. But there's lots of other things that have been going on as well. The RMT represented some of the sacked ferry workers in the P&O scandal that happened back in 2022. There's been the campaign to fight against ticket office closures at train stations. There's also been, work on the underground, organising tube drivers, and then a slightly lesser known campaign that the RMT does, which is organising outsourced workers, cleaners who work for a number of companies like Serco or ISS, who work on the trains.
What made him so successful, not just as a union organiser, but also as a broader political figure that many of us have come to know him as?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, obviously, we've just spoken a little bit about the work that he did, as RMT General Secretary, but it doesn't really make any sense to praise him, specifically, just on the industrial platform. It was about how much more he gave to the movement. I think there are a few things you can pick out. I think one is his absolute refusal to operate within the boundaries set by the sort of boundaries of acceptability set by the establishment. And that was clearest when you saw his open disdain with dealing with the stupidity of the questions put to him by people like Kay Burley, people like Richard Madeley. Telling Richard Madeley he was talking twaddle, telling Kay Burley she'd gone off into the land of the surreal. He was really happy to call that stuff out. And only when you saw him calling it out did you realise, quite how infrequently that actually happens. But, I think another thing is that people really respected his principled stance, both in terms of when he was talking about workers, he was really explicit about broadening out the disputes, not just talking about pay and conditions, but linking it to, much, much wider things. So, when he said, this is about, railway workers deserving more pay, he didn't just stop there. And he said, because actually, why should the working class be poor? And we've been made poor by the government. We've been made poor by train operating companies. And I think that was really refreshing, because it's a full political analysis that actually really helps people understand exactly how the situation's come to be. And that principled stance didn't just stop when he was talking about paying conditions. He was very vocal across a whole swathe of things. He's been vocal in his support for Palestine. Back in last year when there was the outbreak of far-right violence, he urged RMT branches to get in touch with local mosques to offer support. And I think people really respect that. He's been able to cohere, the trade union movement with lots of other kinds of movements. My job is to speak to workers. I go to picket lines up and down the country, and his name is, I can hardly think of a picket line where his name isn't mentioned. Even amongst friends of mine who, maybe work in hospitality, who aren't unionized, or like have quite poor trade union literacy, people really cling to him. Often when I tell people what I do, I say, "Oh, I'm an industrial correspondent." They say, "Oh, what the hell's that?" I'll say, "Oh, well, Mick Lynch," and they'll go, "Oh, yeah, I love Mick Lynch." So I think he really became a shorthand for the strikes, and also just for the fact that the economic model that we are working under is completely broken.
Yeah, he kind of became synonymous with not just the particular conditions for rail workers, but also the fight back in general. And I think you're completely right to identify that, he didn't allow himself to be boxed in as someone who can only talk about the particular workplace struggles of the people that he is representing, but he actually took the fact that he is, an elected member, he has the backing of this workforce behind him, to actually speak more holistically about our economic system and how it's screwing so many people over, not just the specific sectors that he is representing. So given that kind of more holistic position that he has publicly, I know that you can't look into a crystal ball and you probably haven't had this discussion with Mick Lynch himself, but what would you like to see next from him now that he has kind of closed his tenure at the RMT?
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think that Mick Lynch probably himself is slightly baffled by, his cult status, because I've heard him say, and I've read, him saying before, there are lots of people who could do my job, and that's because the job that he's doing is just speaking on behalf of his members. So that gives him that authority. That democracy, the union democracy, enables him to speak with such clarity. So what would I like for Mick Lynch? I think a long and happy retirement. I think the job of being a general secretary, having seen it up close in my work, it seems very stressful. And I think he deserves a long and happy retirement.
Spoken like a true Labour movement correspondent there. So going back to the RMT, what is the legacy that Lynch has left behind, and what, from your understanding, are the priorities now for workers in the energy and transport sector?
So what's coming next specifically is that Mick Lynch will be in place till the end of May, and then there'll be a leadership election for the post of General Secretary. So that's the kind of timeline for that. But speaking more broadly in terms of what comes next for the union, so the RMT is currently facing a really different industrial climate to the one that Mick Lynch did, and that's because we've got a Labour government, and Labour have pledged to renationalise much of the railway system. And so whoever comes in after Lynch will, have a big task to be keeping Labour's feet to the fire on that. Louise Hay, who was Transport Secretary, I know worked closely with the RMT, and she's no longer in the post. And so, they're going to be keeping a really close eye on making sure that there's absolutely no backtracking on that pledge. But besides that, there's absolutely loads of work that needs doing. Lynch might leave, but the day-to-day work of the union goes on. Whether that's continuing to fight on behalf of outsourced workers, obviously the underground, the situation there, and sort of negotiating with TfL and Sadiq Khan. So I think that whoever comes in after Lynch is going to have their work absolutely cut out. But in terms of his broader legacy, I really don't think we can understate how important he was in sort of 2022 onwards, and I think that for many people he will always be synonymous with the sort of so-called hot strike summer.
That was Novara's Labour Movement correspondent, Polly Smythe, speaking to me earlier today. Now, many of us, whilst we do wish Mick Lynch a peaceful and, restful retirement, we are going to miss his special brand of holding politicians and the media accountable. So, for old time's sake, we're going to leave you with a selection of some of Mick's greatest hits.
The government is saying that they are going to bring in agency workers. My question to you is, I'm guessing that some of your members will still stay on the picket lines. What will they do if agency workers try to cross those picket lines?
Well, we will picket them. What do you think we'll do? We run a picket line and we'll ask them not to go to work.
Mick Lynch has previously said he would not negotiate with the Tory government. The head of the, you've said that. The head of let me finish the point. Hang on, let me finish the point. The head of the rail delivery group this morning on the Today programme said that he didn't want the government in the negotiation. We've made money available to the railway industry. It's up to the employers to negotiate with the trade unions. And what happened this afternoon was halfway through these negotiations, while they were ongoing, the unions came out onto the street and gave an impromptu press conference, I mean, TV footage, saying that the strike was going to continue.
OK, let's just pause. Hang on.
I mean, it's on video.
Mick Lynch, excuse me. Mick Lynch, I want to ask you a question.
You think this is a class struggle, class war?
Well, there's a class aspect to everything in the economy. There are lower paid people and there are wealthy people in this society. And what's wrong in this society is that there is an imbalance between the people that do the work to keep this country going, who create the wealth of our civilization and don't get a fair share of that wealth because it's going to people who are vastly wealthy.
It's really nice seeing someone comment on the news who, and I'm not one of these people, but who actually has like the legitimacy of a workforce behind them, who actually has like credibility to be there. And it gives you a kind of like so much of that. Obviously, like he's a really talented orator, he's a really talented speaker, he's a talented organizer, but so much of that power comes from his legitimacy. And we just don't see that. We don't see enough of union organizers commenting on the news, even though they are the people who are directly dealing with consequences on the ground for working class people.